All right, now it's time to assemble the motor casing with all the components. First, I have my fuel grain with the Pringles and paraffin wax. I wrapped it in tape to make sure it seats snugly but still slides in and out. I did the same thing with the nitrous charger. It slides pretty smoothly but still requires some force to move it in and out. First, I also installed the external thrust ring on the top. All right, and now to get started, I'm gonna take my motor, my grain, and slide it down the top of the casing towards the bottom. I have a pen here, a dowel, pencil, basically anything that's long enough to reach most of the way down works. And then I slid this pretty far down. And then first comes this O-ring. You want to take one of the larger ones. You can also optionally coat these in Krytox nitrous safe grease, but because I don't have some right now, it's also very expensive. I'm not going to. If you don't coat it, you need to replace the O-ring after every single firing to make sure it's safe. But don't use any other grease, otherwise it will burn the O-ring and can cause a lot of problems with the rocket. So that O-ring goes nicely in there, and just push it down, make sure it's nicely seated along the edges. Now that that's nicely seated, I could take my nozzle and then slide this in. Now you can see I didn't slide my fuel grain far enough down, so I can just push that down a little bit. It's not too particular in terms of how far you have to do it to set it up. All right, now that that's in, I insert the chafing washer, which is also the rear closure, right over the top of this nozzle. Once that's in, now comes the clips, the rings. This has some orientation. It may be extremely hard to tell from the camera, but there's a curved and a sharp edge. The curved edge should be inserted facing downwards. I have my snap ring pliers, which are basically just a pair of pliers with two little pins on the end, which lets you squeeze this so that I can comfortably seat it into the groove. All right, and now that you can see that's seated in nicely. So I take this and I'm going to slowly push my my fuel grain up, which should compress everything in the assembly. And as you can see, my nozzle is now lined up nicely. Now we're going to turn it over and start working from the opposite side. Take the second large O-ring, slide it all the way down against the fuel grain, and then take the dowel, pen, pencil, whatever, as long as it has a smooth end, it works, and tamp it down lightly, and make sure it's really flat along the end of the fuel grain. If you can see, and then this one is pretty important, so it's a good idea to inspect it with a flashlight. May not be possible to see with the camera, but it is pretty good against that. Next, we can just set this down off to the side for a moment, balancing it on the nozzle, and you're gonna take the preheater. I'm gonna put my preheater grain, which I already did. This is Pyrodex pellet. I wrapped a little bit of masking tape or painter's tape around the outside to make it fit nice and snug, and sanded it pretty flush. These don't have to be perfect. All it has to do is just give a big enough kick to melt my burst disc, which is this tiny little plastic guy. This is what stops the nitrous from flowing after it's been pierced by the piercer, this guy. So now that that's in, I have to put the burst disc first, and then the O-ring. This is this really tiny O-ring. And then, last but not least, the piercer. So as you can see, the pointy part faces out. Later, this is going to go above and get pressed in like that by the screw. So now that that's all done, I take this and just let it slide down. You want to hold it at an angle so that it doesn't slide too quickly and move weird. If you look closely, it should be all the way down in there. Just tamp this one down against the O-ring. Be careful not to dislodge the piercer in its O-ring, otherwise nothing's going to work. Next comes a part where you have to be really careful. This is the nitrous casing. So I have to push this down into this. Minor mishap, I accidentally knocked the piercer unit and it fell apart. So I just have to replace the O-ring and components. I may have put a little much tape around this end of the unit. So to prevent that from being a problem, I'm just going to take a little bit off. This part isn't scientific or anything. You don't have to be particularly precise. It just has to not slide around too much, but also not be impossible to slide down. You want it to slide pretty smoothly though, in order to prevent this from sliding too quickly and then hitting the piercer and turning into basically a mortar. Because if this hits the piercer fast enough and punctures the disc, it will just shoot straight out because of the pressure inside. So I want to angle it nicely and then just slowly push it down until I encounter some pressure, like that. And then carefully set it back down. And then I'm going to take the forward closure. This should then slide nicely in. This should place with the tube facing out. Okay, now comes a slightly more difficult part. I have to place this retaining clip. I'm going to place the sharpest edge facing outward. Should be this edge. It should point out away from me. So I'm going to use my snap ring pliers to do that. So you can see it's seated nicely in the groove. This is loose, but that's okay. So then comes what's going to be a harder part. This is a little bit tricky, but I'm going to take the screw and slowly, very, very slowly, start threading it into the threads on the closure. At the same time, I want to make sure I'm not twisting very hard. I want to be very, very loose and start pulling out as I'm doing it. Once you encounter any sort of pressure or any difficulty, stop. This will bring the closure up to touching the snap ring. This is how you activate the motor. So when it's ready to be fired, what I'm going to do is I am going to take this and push down, twist it. This will compress all the elements, making sure I have a good seal for the most part. But also, it will pierce the seal on the nitrous charger, which will open the whole system and prepare to fire. All right, that's just the assembly process.